Welcome to another 21 Hats Dashboard, brought to you by our sponsor, The Great Game of Business. I'm Lauren Feldman, and I'm here with John Arensmeyer, who is founder and CEO of Small Business Majority, an advocacy group for businesses and entrepreneurs. Welcome back, John.
Good to be here, Lauren.
Always great to have you, especially there's been a flurry of news of late, and in particular, a lot of decisions coming out of the Supreme Court at the end of June. Some of that, I think, has gotten lost with all the presidential politics and everything happening. I'm so happy that you're here to talk about what business owners should be paying attention to. I'm hoping you can help us sort out what the impact might be and what, if anything, owners can do to prepare. Let's start with the big one, the overturning of what's been known as the Chevron doctrine. I think, correct me if I get any of this wrong, but I think the most important thing to understand about that is that the court has basically taken power to interpret regulations away from federal agencies and given it to judges. A lot of business groups have cheered this decision because they think it will mean less regulation. I know you testified before Congress last week about this. Tell us, what do you think?
Well, Lauren, I'm surprised that business is celebrating this because, look, businesses, and particularly small businesses, rely on regulatory certainty. Having a regulatory process that bounces around from court to court with different rules for different jurisdictions and not knowing when and how decisions will be made, it's incredibly disruptive. Secondly, business regulation that impacts business requires a level of expertise, and you want somebody making that decision who has expertise, and where there's a process for input. Everybody gets input into the regulatory process to ensure maximum effectiveness combined with minimal disruptions. Third, small businesses lack the resources to secure the legal expertise that they're going to need to run around the country, constantly tracking and adapting to changing regulations as it bounces around. And finally, from a small business standpoint, it puts them in a disadvantage vis-a-vis large corporations, exacerbating the unfair competitive environment that already exists. I should add, this should be a bipartisan issue. You know, there are regulations that come out when there's a Republican in office that progressives and Democrats don't like also. So this isn't something that is just one party, and we should be focused on the certainty and the expertise.
Just to make the point you just made, the ruling that was overturned is a 1984 ruling that at the time was considered a conservative ruling. It was unanimous. I think it was written by Clarence Thomas. And back then, that ruling allowed the Reagan administration to make adjustments through the federal agencies that it wanted to make to the Environmental Protection Act. So yeah, you could argue this should be bipartisan. But the other argument you do hear, and I'm sure you've heard this, I'm curious what your response to it is that when it's the agencies under an administration, it automatically becomes political. And if you're talking about uncertainty, you get the uncertainty of things changing from one administration to the next. We've got the example of what's happened with the overtime pay issue. Obama did one thing, Trump reversed it. Biden wants to go back in the direction that Obama went, and now that's on hold because a federal judge stopped it. Isn't that a recipe for uncertainty as well?
Look, there are multiple levels of checks within the federal regulatory process. And I should add that the uncertainty, these decisions are made mostly by civil servants. And you're absolutely right. Whoever is in power in the executive branch is going to influence that. But there are multiple levels of checks within the federal regulatory process. There's the overall Office of Administration and Regulatory Affairs, or IRA, which is part of OMB, which reviews government regulations. And then there's specific small business checks. There's a Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act, otherwise known as SBREFA, that has a check over EPA, OSHA, and CFPB regulations. The Small Business Administration's Office of Advocacy also plays a role. So there are checks in the system, but at the end of the day, you're not going to get the level of uncertainty and disagreement that you're going to get from one federal district court to another. right now we can see with sort of forum shopping for these decisions, it just creates chaos across the country. At least you have one regulatory body and decisions being made by civil servants with checks in place. And yes, there are going to be differences, and that's why I don't think there should be a partisan issue. It should be bipartisan.
We can wish for that system, but but it's not. That's not what we have, and it looks like we're stuck with this for the foreseeable future. What are you hearing from small business majority members? I mean, how are businesses reacting to this, and is there anything they can do to cope with it?
Well, to the extent that they are affected by federal regulation, they're concerned about uncertainty. They're concerned that, like it or not, whether they like a regulation or not, if it's enacted by one singular entity with all the checks that I just talked about, they know they can rely on that. Look, there may be regulations they don't like, but at the end of the day, they're like, okay, we need to live with those, and we need to build our business model around that and get investment around that. And if that's changing, depending on what court someone decides to go and file a lawsuit in, that's a problem. And so it isn't a question of they like all regulations or they don't like all regulations. It's a question of certainty, and that's what they're concerned about.
Here's another example. We've talked about this before when you've been here. That's the ban on non-competes. That was put into effect. A federal judge in Texas, I believe, has stayed the ban. This seems like the kind of ruling that is now highly likely to be upheld if it should go to the Supreme Court. What do you think of that?
Well, we're not sure what's going to happen when it goes to the Supreme Court, but we can't have a situation where we wait for the Supreme Court to decide on every single rule and regulation. And we don't know what's going to happen with non-competes. And by the way, if it were to go to the Supreme Court, it would take a while. But again, we have a situation where there's a judge in one of the districts in Texas. The decision is very limited to it only applies to the actual plaintiffs in this case, and it's an injunction to be decided later. But again, it just shows how, okay, we've got a decision, and now we're going to have courts weighing in differently. We have to wait to go to the Supreme Court. That's not a way to run a system. It's not a way for businesses to be able to plan. I should just mention on the merits of it, and we've talked about this before, that we certainly believe that non-compete clauses are antithetical to the free, fair, and open competition. And you just look at the name non-compete. It means you can't compete. What else can I say? We need to have a level playing field where everyone can compete. It's a significant impediment to entrepreneurship, specifically starting and growing a business. Someone's working somewhere, they want to go start their own business. We're seeing 18 million new businesses started in the last 3.5 years, or 2.5 years, actually, 3.5 years, I guess. And they are, you want to help that process. Having non-compete stifles innovation, contributes to corporate concentration. And we've talked about this before. Non-competes are not enforceable in California, Oklahoma, and North Dakota. There is no evidence that not being able to enforce non-competes has been an economic impediment. I think it'd be ludicrous to assume that somehow the California economy can't function because non-compete agreements are not allowed. This says nothing about whether you can have a non-disclosure agreement, a trade secrets agreement. We encourage businesses to have those in place. That is very different from saying you can't go and do something in your field, start a business in your field.
Next topic, let's talk about something that I think's a little bit happier. And again, something that we've talked about when you've been here before, and that's the state small business credit initiative. This is a big pot of money that we've talked about. It's been talked about for a couple of years. It's money that's dispersed through the states, which I think causes some confusion. I don't think there's widespread understanding of where this stands and what's available and what someone should do to check it out. Can you help us with that? Where does this program stand?
Well, let me say, it's a great program. It's $18 billion going to the states and native tribes for capital and technical assistance. $500 million of that is specifically designated to technical assistance. States are free to build their own programs. This is a reprise of a very successful program that existed in the previous decade. In this particular case, it's targeted at business enterprises owned and controlled by what is technically called socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. It's essentially businesses in under-resourced communities around the country, obviously heavily BIPOC, businesses that are owned by women, and those in areas all over the country where they don't have the same resources you might have on the coasts or in some of the more successful urban areas. We're very involved in this, and one of the issues is that there's a big disparity of implementation across the states. California, for example, has embraced this. They've got a lot of activity going on. The government has continued some programs that they'd had before and incorporated this into it. And then you go to the other extreme, a state like Texas doesn't even want the money, and then you have everything in between. So what we're doing is we're working with capital providers, CDFIs and others, community development finance institutions and others, to help them understand how they can best fit into the program, with technical assistance providers so they can get the support, and with small business owners to understand what their needs are, and to make sure that that's communicated. And then we're working with the state agencies. We're doing research into what is happening, what's working, what's not, and trying to get that information to the state agencies. Right now, the first tranche of money is out there, but there are 2 more tranches of money coming, and we want to make sure that we're advocating for changes that reduce the friction in those programs and help get the money out there. Again, it's 50 states and a number of native tribes, all have different rules, and it does make it complicated. And the good news is the states can tailor the programs to for their own particular needs. But the challenge is that there's not one size fits all in terms of what needs to work here.
Obviously, it's tricky being 50 states. Do you have a suggestion for somebody who wants to figure out what's going on in their state? How do you find out?
Well, we're active in about 11 states, so people should go to our venturize.org site or smallbusinessmajority.org, and even if you're not in the 11 states where we're most active, we can help direct you. The problem is the SSBCI program, it's not a retail program, so you can't just go online as a business, SSBCI. The money's all being funneled through state programs. So I've definitely checked with the region, even though this is not an SBA program, the regional SBA offices can be helpful. And then, check with your state economic development offices. You're right, there isn't one place for all 50 states to go on the web, but please contact us and we can certainly be helpful there.
Is it worth checking if you're not in a part of an underserved community?
Yes. The money is not exclusively for under-resourced communities. And look, one of the challenges that there's a lot of inertia to try to get the money out quickly. And, we want to make sure the money is actually going to the smaller businesses in the most under-resourced communities. So I think there's an opportunity for everybody here. This is not limited to one particular group, but it is definitely, the intention is to get money, to use a guarantee with, by the way, a 10-to-1 leverage with private dollars to first loss guarantee, so that lenders will provide this money, capital providers will, and by the way, there's a chunk of this is venture as well as debt financing. We'll get it into the hands of people who are not as likely to be able to get that money through traditional either venture or bank sources. So at the end of the day, I've just checked if you're working with a lender now, check with them, because at the end of the day, they're also combining these guarantees with other programs they have. Again, it's not like you can go to a bank or a CDFI and there's a SSBCI specific program. They're using the money and the guarantees to supplement the work they're doing anyway. So reaching out to lenders in your communities, particularly to CDFIs and other mission-driven lenders, is the way to go. And again, it's not like the SSBCI itself is not a retail brand. It's really there to support the money that's being loaned and the technical assistance is being provided already.
That's a great tip. All right, last topic for today. There's a big battle looming that's getting closer by the day over the expiration of the Trump tax cuts. This comes next year, 2025. If they just expire, a lot of tax rates will go up, including for business owners. If they're extended, of course, our national debt will continue to expand. What should business owners be watching for and thinking about as this plays out?
Well, as you suggest, a lot is going to be on the table. I mean, everything that was in the 2017 so-called Trump tax bill is most of it is expiring at the end of next year. So a lot is going to be on the table, and there will be other tax issues as well. Our biggest focus, and the one that's probably most directly impacting majority of small businesses, is the so-called 199A pass-through business income deduction.
Right.
Right now, businesses can deduct 20% of their pass-through income with certain limitations, particularly in the higher income levels. But in any event, but when you do the calculations, you realize the way the system's set up now is 73% of the current pass-through deduction benefit flows to the largest and wealthiest 5% of businesses. More than a million businesses with more than $1 million in AGI, which is less than 1% of all business owners, claimed over 1/3 of the deduction so far. Financial benefits to a pass-through entity making $500,000 or 20 times the benefits to a business making $75,000, and those kind of statistics go on and on. This is really not the best way to support true Main Street businesses. You've got an average profit of $33,000. So what we're proposing instead, and some people want to eliminate this, and we're like, no, let's fix it. Let's make this work. So we're proposing a bottom-up $25,000. You might call a standard deduction with a phase out for individuals earning more than $400,000. And this makes it more of a bottom up than a top down, where the bulk of the benefit would go to the smallest Main Street businesses and not the way the money is being distributed now.
What kind of reaction? Have you started spreading the word that you're proposing this?
Well, a little bit of a teaser here. We have been doing some research. We've got some preliminary findings. I can't really share them. We haven't really done the vetting and analysis of them yet. So that's for the next time we chat, Lauren. But basically, there's real interest in majority support for something that would be more bottom up than top down. Again, it sounds good. You say, you can deduct 20% of your income, but who's getting most of that income? And the rates are much higher for those who are in the higher brackets. So when you run the numbers, you get the statistics I just mentioned. And if you do a bottom up, we've put this out there. I mean, we're happy to talk about variations on this. We're looking for something that's more bottom up than top down. And yes, of course, it's going to be attractive to people who aren't making that much money. The study just came out that showed that claimants with under $100,000 in income, an average deduction for them is $2,000. So, and 20% of that is $400 benefit. So, right now we can fix that by making this a much more bottom up system. There are going to be other provisions on the table as well, but that's the one we're most focused on.
You are going to get pushback from those businesses who have come to rely on that 20% deduction, obviously, and their voices will be heard. I hate to see a battle within the small business community. How do you anticipate handling that?
Well, look, at the end of the day, you're going to figure out who's going to benefit more from a bottom up versus this current situation, and I think it's pretty clear you're going to have a much higher number of businesses that will benefit from having some kind of standard deduction or some kind of other related bottom-up benefit than the current system. So we need to make sure that we're making the case that the benefit to real Main Street businesses, average profit of $33,000, is going to be much better with a reformed and revised system. Look, there's people out there who want to get rid of this totally because, as you mentioned, there's a deficit issue. And what we're proposing is not going to be free either from a cost standpoint. And we're all about, look, if you're going to spend dollars or you're going to reduce revenue, do it in a way, and you're going to target it to those who need it the most. You don't target it to businesses that don't really need it. So I think it's going to be a question of who's going to benefit more from bottom up than a top down.
All right. John, thank you so much. John Ahrensmeyer is founder and CEO of Small Business Majority. This episode was brought to you by The Great Game of Business, which helps businesses use an open book management system to help build healthier companies. You can learn more at greatgame.com. Thanks for taking the time, John.
Thank you, Lauren.
Have a great week, everybody.